Back in the day, before streaming, before CDs, we listened to music on albums. A vinyl disc spinning 33 and a third revolutions per minute brought us great music one side at a time. 20 or so minutes of music, 4 or 5 songs usually, that created a single listening experience. This format exposed us to other songs of the artist, not just the hits, and often flowed in an order that was created to build and maintain or mold a musical experience for the listener.
Sideshow brings musical experiences from the past to life today. Here, we discuss and review individual sides of record albums we have grown to appreciate and hope you will too. Welcome to The Sideshow. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of The Sideshow. Mark, you are going to be taking the helm for this one. Why don't you let everybody know what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, thanks, Mike. Today, we're going to be talking about Side 2 from Bob Dylan, Infidels. Now, this is first of all, let's get it out there. The person that introduced me to this album was you, Mike. I had really not been a big fan of Bob Dylan's at all. Not that I disliked him. I just hadn't followed his music. From high school, just to kind of fill everybody in on a little of our background. After high school, I joined the service and was away for a number of years, for about 8 years. In the service, and I continued to listen to a lot of classic rock, some newer stuff as well, but really just kind of a continuation of the music that we've been listening to in high school. And I think it's fair to say you kind of, as you went off to school, you took a lot of different directions and listened to a lot wider range of music during that time period than I did. Well, fast forward a few years, and again, to fill everybody in on a little bit about Mike and I, we ended up rooming together while Mike was getting his law degree, and I was finishing my degree when we were going to the University of Wisconsin. And Mike had a pretty large collection of music, a lot of which he introduced me to. And one of the albums was Bob Dylan's Infidels. And Mike, you listened to a lot more than just that album. You had listened to and become a pretty big fan of Dylan's, and continue to this day. But until that point, I'd never even owned a Bob Dylan album or CD at that point. Now I own a number of them, and it really started with this particular album. In fact, this particular side that we're going to talk about today, which was the second side. So. But in kind of coming of age of at that time, and in having this music introduced to me over time, I've learned quite a bit about Bob Dylan and some of the things that he did. I mean, first of all, just a little bit of background on Bob. He was actually born Robert Zimmerman in 1941. He's 83 now, even though he is still performing. From time to time, over a period of over 60 years, he is, arguably one of the greatest songwriters ever, and an incredibly successful musician, selling over 125 million albums during his career. By any measure, he is up there in the top tier of success in music and in songwriting. And especially considering his importance in the 60s to, at kind of a culmination of success and popularity of folklore music, kind of colliding with the counterculture and protest movement in the 60s. He happened to have a perfect mesh that really fed into that as an amazing songwriter who was able to touch what people were feeling at the time. And I think that was bringing together kind of a combination of folk and pop and rock and blues music that, again, just perfectly fed right at the right time into this kind of counterculture that was happening. And I've always believed that it's hard to connect with what was a musician thinking as they were writing, as they were producing. Same thing with a lot of artists, whether it be a painter or a writer. But it's difficult to get into their mind at that time and try to identify who they were connecting with. They were just, and I see this a lot in Bob Dylan, he was just writing. He was, he has really been considered a poet in the way that he wrote. The words and his lyrics are clearly the most powerful part of his music and his connection to his audience. But whether he was intending to or not, his skills and his ability as a poet, as a lyricist, as a songwriter, and a singer captured at a perfect moment for American society, because it was incredibly powerful at that time.
Well, and the points you make about Dylan generally are all. I mean, I agree with the way you've characterized him, generally speaking, and he's gone through a lot of different phases over the course of his career where he's focused on other things. I mean, before 1966 or up until 1966, which was the year that the album Blonde on Blonde was released, with Just Like a Woman, I Want You, Rainy Day Women. It was, I mean, double album was a massive, hit. Blah blah blah. Well, he was already towards the end of his second phase by 1966. Initially acoustic, more folk oriented music, but he was a rock and roller at heart in many ways, and so he went electric and gained more fans than he lost. There was a lot of hoopla. It's emphasized in the movie, No Direction, or A Complete Unknown, that there was a lot of resistance by some to his electrifying, but he gained more fans than he lost, and most of his original fans kind of stuck with him anyway. But by the time Infidels came out which was 1983. And you were in the service. I was going to college in Minneapolis at the time, at the University of Minnesota. Bob Dylan himself attended for a brief period of time the University of Minnesota. And when that came out, his like 3 or so albums before that, starting in 1979, were very Christian oriented. Slow Train Coming, Saved, and Shot. That was pretty, and just the cover of Saved. Is and Slow Train Coming wasn't exactly subtle. Songs like Gotta Serve Somebody and whatnot. I mean, he wasn't playing it that close to the vest. But Infidels was sort of his first post-Christian album, and that's there is a lot of religious imagery in some of the songs on Infidels, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't as preachy. It wasn't evangelical like his last few albums was, and it was sort of like critics at the time were saying things like Bob Dylan is back, and so Infidels was, I can remember when it came out and listening to it, and it just had a fresh sort of it was Bob Dylan was back in a way, and and some of the songs on that album, Joker Man, Man of Peace, Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight, are great songs generally, and for Bob Dylan, they're great songs, and that's, for me, that's a high bar.
Well, and I first of all, I mean, I 100% agree about the notion of phases that he went through. I mean, he went through a lot. I mean, just looking at what I would call the his early period, and by early period I mean the time from when he started his first album, which was really just folk song covers that he was doing. I mean, really not even highlighting what would be his greatest skill, which was his own songwriting that he had. from his first album, and then which was just a self-titled Bob Dylan album in 1962, you had a sequence of albums that were in this kind of initial, more folk type atmosphere, and really pushing the freewheeling Bob Dylan, the times they are a changing, and then you move to an album where you talked about this transition to electric, which was very controversial at the time, specifically with the people in the folk arena who wanted him to stay there. Clearly, Bob Dylan had his own ideas. This notion of who he was really singing to, I think that push for him to know, this is the music that I want to play. I want to go electric. And I agree with you that, now we look at a lot of artists who transition through different, whether it be personas or types of music that they're doing. That particular change seemed to get a lot of attention at the time, but really is a little less significant now. I think that there's people such as yourself, such as myself, who's come to like Bob Dylan a little bit later. There are songs from both sides of this that we still listen to and enjoy. It wasn't I don't listen to any of the early stuff or later stuff. But you moved into that electric period, and Highway 61 Revisited in 1965, I think, is where he really made it huge. Right. I mean, that album was like an arrival as far as a combination of a strong following and then just commercial success. It was a huge album that followed by Blonde on Blonde, which there's many people that I talk to about Bob Dylan that would say that's their favorite Bob Dylan album, or is considered one of his best albums. So that was really kind of a peak of success for him. And quite frankly, he followed it up with a sequence of about 10 albums that, although, again, plenty of good music on those albums, when you talk about, albums that, really arrive as huge successes, they didn't reach that, that Highway 61 Revisited or Blonde on Blonde era. Interestingly enough, not really until he hit this kind of this Christian trilogy of Slow Train Coming, Saved, and Shot of Love. Slow Train Coming had the song Serve Somebody, which was his first hit single in a number of years, and it kind of brought him back into more of the mainstream. But it was Christian music. In fact, Mark Knopfler was brought in to help with Slow Train Running, and he agreed to, before he realized that he kind of complained on the side. It's like, geez, this is a Christian album. I hadn't really signed on for this, and it was more than just undertones. It was like, this is where he's coming from. So there was something of a transition to when Infidels came out. That this is whether you want to say Dylan is back or Dylan has moved on from at least working with that type of music. It absolutely was a transition, and it created an interesting album.
Yeah, and he had and Mark Knopfler was not only played on Infidels, but he was the producer.
Yes.
And Dylan may have been a co-producer, or so, I don't recall off the top of my head. But Mark Knopfler, in addition to playing guitar on the album, was producer. And in some of the songs you get a Dire Straits sort of feel.
Oh yes, you can hear Mark.
Like at the beginning of like I and I, very Dire Straits feel to that. And the rest of the band was a killer band. The rhythm section, bass and drums, was Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare. And they were like reggae session musicians from Jamaica, or
a
at least
time with Black Uhuru,
stuff like that. So a decidedly funkier, a different sort of groove than you might have previously connected with Bob Dylan, and Mick Taylor, who is an excellent blues guitarist, originally kind of made his bones in England with the John Mayall Blues Breakers, or with the John Mayall's band, and then played with the Stones during kind of their what I feel is one of their better periods. And you mentioned, to kind of go back to something you were saying about Bob Dylan's electric albums, that bringing it all back home, Highway 61 Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde was a trio of records that was not unlike, like when the Stones, kind of with Beggar's Banquet,
Mm-hmm.
Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, and the Beatles. And I think that in some ways, Dylan's three albums are maybe, there's a closer analogy with the Beatles, but like Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sergeant Pepper.
Yes, yes.
And it was just in the rock era, that mid late 60s, whereas the Stones, that spilled a little into the early 70s, but they were just those major artists, like the Who were kicking
Yeah.
out, Who's Next, and eventually Quadrophenia. uh, uh, Pink Floyd was like in the early 70s.
Yeah.
They were a little bit later than that, but where they all had their run of music. And uh, uh, so I like the way that you characterize that. And then he had a motorcycle accident in between Blonde on Blonde and John Wesley Harding, and so he was kind of out of the picture for, it might have been a year. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
exactly. I mean, but and then John Wesley Harding, very different, a lot quieter, and then Nashville Skyline. So he was off on a whole different direction before
Mm-hmm.
the end of the '60s.
Yeah.
He'd gone through three phases before
Yes.
the end of the '60s. So
And,
um,
I think that, for those that, want to learn, a little bit more about that, I mean, and actually a good place to start is the recent, Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, which really takes him right up to, bringing it all back home is where that music kind of stops. In fact, right at the end of the movie you're talking about, Highway 61 Revisited kind of gives a, kind of those early days of his. I am not as much as an expert as some, but I understand it's a fairly decent depiction of that time, of him. And the even Bob Dylan in interviews, more recent interviews, has said that he struggled to get back to the same skill in songwriting and lyrics that he had, in some of those early albums, where, I mean, really there was, just, even he acknowledges kind of going through some of the lyrics himself and just saying, yeah, I can't do that anymore. I would argue that there, and maybe it was some of the freedom of getting away from focusing on the purely Christian type tones of that Christian trilogy. When he came back from Infidels, I think that there not only are some good songs, but there's some really good lyrics on these songs as well. And things that, to the point where people are still talking about them now on different, whether it be, blogs or bulletin boards or whatever that are out there. So, it's a good album and great. In fact, I'll just, let's take a look real quick at the packaging. This was the album itself. First of all, I'll point out, I think of just about every photograph I've ever seen of Bob Dylan, this is the probably most normal looking that I've ever seen him. He's always had. I mean, I don't mean that he doesn't. He's just always had kind of a weird look to his face to me. They catch him in an expression, the skinniness of the face and the jawline, especially in some of the younger pictures. It's he always had kind of a unique look. And you can look at pictures of him today and say, yeah, he's the same. He's just 60 years older, right? This particular one, I do feel, is about as normal as you get, right? With Bob Dylan looking pretty simple. Just some artwork on the back, which just a loving kiss, that's here, and then on the sleeve itself, you've got some promotion of some earlier albums that he had, and then just some artwork. No lyrics on here, which I found interesting because there's the lyrics are a pretty significant part of the work that he has. And just finally, before we get into the side itself, I think that there were some interesting comments from Mark Knopfler, who did work as producer on this album, as well as doing some playing. First of all, I think that it's, I guess it would be considered almost tragic. Mark Knopfler talked about it later, that he was not actually able to stay with the work on this album until it was completed. He had to leave for a tour of his own in Europe. So there, he's often said if he'd have been able to be there through the completion of the mix, it would have had a different sound, and he feels a little smoother sound. He even commented that some of them really even sounded like rough cuts coming out of it. I think a lot of that might not be as well known to the layman's ear, like myself listening to it, but for someone as precise and understanding as Mark Knopfler, he felt if he would have continued on, he could have continued to work. And he said it was very difficult working with Bob Dylan, and not that it wasn't a good experience. I mean, Bob Dylan had thoughts in his mind of what he wanted to do. He wrote and envisioned these songs. He also talked about the genius of Bob Dylan's songwriting and his singing, the way that he sang the words. He wasn't as complimentary about his musical ability and an ability to play the guitar or the piano. So bringing all that together as the producer, he saw as a challenge, but he clearly enjoyed the work and clearly had a lot of respect for Bob Dylan when he was there. And you can in fact hear some Mark Knopfler on the song, on the album.
Well, and I mean, I can definitely hear the Mark Knopfler sound in a lot of the songs, and he was kind of a good fit for Bob Dylan, more musically than lyrically. I mean, while I think that it's true that Mark Knopfler was influenced by Bob Dylan, well, like the initial hit of Dire Straits, Sultans of Swing, it kind of had a Bob Dylan-y sound to it. I mean, some people thought, is this Bob Dylan?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it wasn't, not, it people figured it out pretty quick, but there are other times on later Dire Straits material. There's some songs on Love Over Gold, like Industrial Disease in particular, where the way that Knopfler sings reminds me of Dylan. So there was a mutual appreciation between those two for each other in terms of their music, that despite the fact that they were very different personalities, and I can easily envision the grinding of the gears in the process, what it produced musically was good stuff.
Well, and we're going to focus on side two. Just you brought up some points. I mean, there's a couple songs on the first side that I'll actually be referring to a little bit as I talk through some of the songs, because there is some connection. It's important to this whole notion of Bob Dylan coming out of this Christianity period. There was also kind of a political thing going on, because right at the time that this album was coming out, he made a fairly public trip to Israel, and was, for the first time, had really allowed himself to be photographed in some of the Jewish apparel and these types of things that previously he had not. So there's a lot of people that draw stuff from that particular visit here. And then the fact that even though this certainly would not be considered, as his previous albums, a Christian or religious album, there certainly was some, as you pointed out, imagery or tones that can be drawn as we talk through this. But the first song on side two, we're looking at side two, was a song called "Man of Peace." And this, before we get into what it was about or whatever, it starts out and it's kind of got this kind of almost like rowdy, almost you feel like you're in a roadhouse type. It's kind of a bouncy, kind of tap your foot type of tune. You can picture a couple of guys. You got a guitar, you've got a keyboard there, some harmonica going on that just kind of gets you almost stomping as the music gets started. It is, when you look at some of the songs on this side, Bob Dylan has always had kind of a scale of how the words interacted with the music. By that I mean there was some songs that were more musical, where you focused on the tune, the rhythm, along with the lyrics. And you had other vehicles for Dylan that were really about, he'd written this poem or these lyrics, and the song was just a vehicle for him to get those words and that story out as quickly
Yeah.
as possible. There's many songs of Bob Dylan's where you can say the lyric and people know what song it is. But they could not necessarily, if you played like the rhythm in the background or tried to whistle the tune, it wouldn't necessarily be recognizable.
No.
It was his lyrics that were the powerful piece. Now, Man of Peace is what I would put more on the musical side. There's some very powerful lyrics in it, but it also has, in its own right, a musical feel to it. It's a foot tapper type song, and it draws you in to the lyrics, which is what I like about the Dylan songs that are more musical. Because yes, his lyrics are powerful, but to draw you in, your head is nodding, your foot is tapping right as he's beginning to sing, and I think that just makes for a more powerful experience, especially when he's trying to get something across that is really very serious. In this particular case, Man of Peace, and the whole notion that sometimes Satan comes as a man of peace. Now, we don't get into a whole lot of political stuff on this particular show, and this was written in the early 1980s. But I will tell you that there are many modern day lines that you could draw from this song directly to people that we now consider our leaders in these days, as there was back in 1983. This notion that someone is coming as a man of peace, but in actuality they are the Satan, because sometimes Satan comes as a man of peace. And he does a wonderful. He approaches this through a number of different verses, and how this reaches out. And he starts out. He's kind of talking to his wife. Look out your window, baby. There's a scene you'd like to catch. The band is playing Dixie. A man got his hand outstretched. Could be the Führer, could be the local priest. Sometimes Satan comes as a man of peace. And again, that's how it starts out, but it really gets it across. It's like you don't know who you're talking about. Now, I have seen some, you're looking at people trying to break these lyrics apart. I've seen a lot of different versions of who Bob Dylan has talked about. In fact, just the other day, I read a very lengthy essay about how Dylan was talking about Anwar Sadat in this song. Again, the whole Jewish piece, his visit to Israel. Anwar Sadat had supposedly just signed this peace accord with Israel. I think that's bullshit. For a number of reasons. First of all, Anwar Sadat took a serious hit when he did this. And the second thing, he was assassinated, probably because he reached this peace agreement by his own people, basically, in 1981, before this song came out. So some of these little theories and stuff you can look at, and I just don't buy them. I actually feel that this song was probably a little bit about someone who was a little more prominent in 1983, and that's probably Ronald Reagan is who I would look at.
Well, and I think you're probably right that was more along the lines of what he was thinking. Although it may not be, it may be more of a holdover from his more evangelically Christian period that he had recently moved out of, where he wasn't necessarily being as explicit about the individual politician, but more just coming up with the idea of Satan as evil or bad, but they, the wolf in sheep's clothing, you shall know them by their fruits, not what they say, what they do. But and just talking about Man of Peace generally, I agree with you with how you characterize the music. I mean, it starts, it's kind of chugs along, and it starts out at the same pace that it maintains over the course of the whole song, kind of a loping pace, good timey feel to it, and the organ actually the keyboard player that had been playing with Dire Straits, a man named Alan Clark, played keyboards, and also Benmont Tench, who is better known as the organ player with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Mm-hmm.
And that organ sound on top of the sort of loping guitars, it just has a good, it just kind of lets you unjangle your bones.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a dance song,
Mm-hmm.
but it's musically just very unique. And the first time that I heard the album, it caught my attention just for the music. And for me, Man of Peace, I mean, that is one of the great songs, and not just Bob Dylan songs, but I mean, for me,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of just the great songs. I never, if it comes on the radio, which isn't all that often, or whenever I listen to it, I remember it's one of the great songs in
Well,
my humble opinion.
absolutely, and musically there are, and again, not we'll talk about some today. This isn't always the case in Bob Dylan songs. You do a couple versions, and then there is a break for some guitar. It keeps the same beat and rhythm that you've been listening to, but you break from the lyrics to hear some guitar. He actually comes back from that break, and this is why I see, and it's one of the things that I think is the lessons or the cautions about such men that Dylan is talking about. He comes back and he says, well, he catch you when you're hoping for the glimpse of the sun, catch you when your troubles feel like they weigh a ton. He's, the whether you're talking politicians or other, mega church leaders, whatever, they're grasping on to people who are struggling, who are having a tough time. The people that are most susceptible to latch on to to this particular individual, and then at the same time he talks about how much people like this can consume the narrative of both people that support them and do not. He can be fascinating, he can be dull, he can ride down Niagara Falls in the barrels of your skull. Now, I think that there's a lot of people today that can relate to watching the news and feel like somebody is riding down Niagara Falls in the barrels of their skull, really kind of consuming, what is happening. And then, that's like as a group of people and how that's being impacted. He also gets a little more personal about how someone can feel with this. He'll put his arms around you. You can feel the tender touch of the beast. Just as it's like you embrace this person and you kind of feel the touch of the beast. And then I think that he brings it around at the end. There's another guitar break in the song, and you come to the last a verse or two, and I think then he begins to talk about what is the impact of this person. It's not just the notion of you've got evil people and people that aren't. There's an actual impact in our world to these people. As he talks about in the end, the howling wolf will howl tonight. The king snake will crawl. Trees that have stood for 1,000 years suddenly will fall. Want to get married? Do it now. Tomorrow, all activity will cease. This is not a flowery outlook for the impact of this man of peace. And then finally closing with after a final short guitar break, somewhere mama's weeping for her blue-eyed boy. She's holding them little white shoes and that little broken toy. Clearly about a mother who has lost a son to war. And again, the ultimate result of this type of the man of peace and what we all feel. And that kind of concludes, sometimes Satan comes of a man of peace. And there's a ride out in the song with some harmonica and guitar that takes us out of the sound. Again, basic same rhythm and song, but we have this kind of harmonica, more of a bluesy kind of take out to the end as a part of the rowdy kind of hand clapping stuff at the beginning of the song.
The lyrics I mean, particularly the verse, and you mentioned it, the line, "He can ride down Niagara Falls in the barrels of your skull," is one of Dylan's best lyrics, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Just that image, and it really captures what someone that manages to get themselves into the heads, positively or negatively, of the public as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
in a kind of a demagogic way. Um, uh, you know, uh, uh, Reagan in a relatively positive way for a lot of people. Not
Mm-hmm.
everyone liked Reagan at the time, and certainly he had a very conservative, politically, principle. But the vibe he gave off, the morning in America was more positive than negative, and he wasn't a mean
Mm-hmm.
spirited person in his tone. More recently, it's been a little different,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say that more recent politicians have gotten into people's heads primarily in a negative sense, and you really do feel like you're going to get smashed on the rocks at the bottom of Niagara Falls,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more like winter is coming as opposed to
Yes.
morning in America, and well, and then he concludes that verse, the riding down Niagara Falls, with, "I can smell something cooking. I can tell there's going to be a feast."
Mm-hmm.
And that has a sort of a, they're turning the spit over the fire pits
Mm-hmm.
kind of imagery to it. And at the end, where you talk about, the mother is weeping for her blue-eyed boy, who, and I agree with your take on that refers to a mother that's lost their son to war. But then the verse concludes, "And he's following a star, the same one them three men followed from the east."
Mm-hmm.
And so he manages to include a lot of religious imagery that just does not have the evangelical preachiness of the earlier thing, and was able to not necessarily kick that to the curb, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thinking, but just sort of leaven it to the point where it was a lot more accessible to people who weren't interested in being preached to
Yeah.
religiously.
Mm-hmm.
A great song. I mean, Man
And
of
it's
Peace. It's just a great song.
and a great start to the side. And this is a great thing about what this whole show is about the power of a side of album, because that song itself is certainly what drew me to this side two of Infidels. In today's world, I would have listened to Man of Peace, and I wouldn't have listened to any other song on this side. But when you put an album on, you put that needle down and you listen to the side. It then exposes you to, in this case, the other three songs on the side. So if we move on, we get from Man of Peace. The second song is called A Union Sundown. Now this, as we talked about before in classifying different types of music and songs that Dylan had, this was a vehicle for him to get his words out. There's really a very straightforward, kind of a fast pace, kind of a tense sound that is in the background. This guitar that is just down 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 down, and which continues on throughout the entire, really not varying at all through the entire song. You have no breaks for any instrumentals, solos, anything like that. It is just a stream of verses and choruses that takes you through the entire song. And in this particular case, it's a fairly straightforward proposal, and that is that we everybody's buying all this shit that isn't bought in America. So why are we complaining that factories are going away, that unions are losing their power, that jobs are going away? This whole notion in from the 70s and into the 80s, what's going on, this buy American thing that was heard as far as autos. But he was just saying, look, we've been doing this for a while, and it is, things like unions, things like being made in the USA. sure was a good idea till greed got in the way, which is really the chorus of the album. Well, it's sundown on the Union and what's made in the USA sure was a good idea till greed got in the way, and points out that this is basically inevitable the way people are acting. He starts out talking about, shoes are from Singapore, my flashlights from Taiwan, my tablecloths from Malaysia. Kind of interesting, this line, and fortuitous, that his belt buckle is from the Amazon. And of course, a lot of people are getting most of their stuff from Amazon these days, but a different thing that he was referring to. So pretty straightforward. Look, this is what's happening. We've got, capitalism is driving this to cheaper foreign stuff, and it's no wonder, or it shouldn't be a wonder to anyone, that we're losing jobs, unions are losing power, we're losing factories, and this is all a consequence of this that is leading to the Union sundown.
Well, and lyrically, I mean, you're right. It's very straightforward. It's almost more like one of his earlier protest songs before he went electric in 1965. It's just the gist of the song and the reasons, the sentiment behind it is it is a protest song. Maybe not as protesty as Blowing in the Wind or Masters of War and or Hard Rain, stuff like that, but definitely a protest song of sorts. And you kind of summed it up. It structurally, as far as the lyrics, it's not unlike a song that came out about 4 years later on the Oh Mercy album called "Everything Is Broken." And it's the lyrical structure, broken this, broken that, broken blah 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 blah, broken this, everything is broken. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and simple. And the music, it's a leaner, more aggressive guitar sound, and the guitar arrangement and the way that the song is recorded, it has some similarities to what Dylan ended up doing later, much later in the later in the 90s, early 2000s, on albums like Love and Theft and Modern Times, where it's sort of just a pared down, guitar oriented sound, not real screechy, but very a lean, clean guitar sound. And so it's like Dylan and Knopfler and Mick Taylor all playing guitars. No one's hogging the lane, and really very much like material that he was going to record 10 years down the line, or 20 years down the line. I think, and he's had bands without the same kind of star power as Mark Knopfler or Mick Taylor would have been at the time that Infidels was recorded, but same kind of style is on this song, and so there's more substance to this song in sort of the Dylan story than meets the eye.
Oh, and he'd said that his motivation for this song came from his personal experiences growing up, seeing what would have been at the end of the 50s, early 60s, the initial decline of the working middle class that was to obviously extend and get much worse as we got into the 70s and the 80s. And when you look at these, the impact that that it had on him, that's what he pointed to as far as what originally brought him to this. But everything that he was talking about had obviously accelerated significantly greater into the 80s when this was written. And I do want to point out that he brings two kind of truths to the table. The first of all is that, well, not every place is like this. It's democracy doesn't rule the world. You better get that in your head. The world is ruled by violence. But I guess that's better left unsaid. That a lot of the countries that we're dealing with don't have the same advantages, and that person needs those 30 cents a day just to survive. So it's not their fault that they're working for cheaper than here. And then finally, that look, this is the way that capitalism is supposed to work. If It said it don't count unless it sells. When it costs too much to build at home, you just build it cheaper somewhere else. And that's really how capitalism is supposed to work. So, there's if we're looking to change this, what is happening, there's bigger changes that we're going to need to make than just a Buy American sticker. There's kind of bigger forces that are at play here. So, I'd agree. There's some deeper themes here, but the song itself is really about getting these words off the album and through your speakers.
Well, I agree, and when kind of your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore is certainly I mean, that was John Prine, but
Yeah.
that's a very Dylan-esque sentiment.
Exactly.
Particularly for someone who's just come off a Christian evangelical Christian period.
So exactly. Well, we move from there to the song "I and I." Now, the first thing is this is a a more musical tune. In fact, you can really hear Mark Knopfler and the Mark Knopfler guitar as this song starts out. And the song itself, which is it's a nice song. The lyrically and vocally, it's also more musical. He's not just talking through the song. There's much more of a rhythm to the verses and the choruses themselves in Dylan's singing. And it's kind of interesting. I always focus first, especially coming later to this music. I mean, I wasn't really listening to Infidels, and not really even listening to it a lot till years after it was originally produced. I mean, 90s and really a lot more even recently. So when I look, okay, well, what does this mean, and what is he talking about? I feel that it's fairly simple. I'll go into what some other people say about it in a second, but to me, in listening to this song, I and I is there's two people that are Bob Dylan. There is the person that he knows himself to be or feels himself to be, and there is this person that he projects himself out to the rest of the world, which is a mix of who he tries to be and who all these people see him as, the inner Bob Dylan and the outer Bob Dylan. And, if you watch the movie, you can see parts of this where there's a conflict between who he wants to be and what he wants to do, what people are expecting of him to do, and what he ultimately ends up doing. And this is just a big conflict between the I and I. Now, I've read a number of pieces about this that talk about, I and I is the person, and God, we're made in God's image. And, again, the obviously, because Dylan had spent quite a bit of time soaking himself into Christianity, this is certainly plausible. It's just not what I ever heard in listening to the song. So I see a much more straightforward take on the song itself as the inner and the outer, who I am and whom I'm seen as, and those are two completely different people.
Well, and the what I always took from it, it's been so long since a strange woman has slept in my bed. Look how sweet she sleeps. How free must be her dreams. He's pondering, the sort of things that you're talking about. But then he goes on, and in another lifetime she must have owned the world or been faithfully wed to some righteous king who wrote psalms. There's and that's a religious imagery, and I guess that kind of come to the punchline. The Old Testament God, I think has had some influence on his constructing these lyrics. The I and I in creation, where one's nature neither honors nor forgives. I and I, one says to the other, no man sees my face and lives. And that kind of the Old Testament angry God, you can't look up, Moses, you didn't want to look upon, so sort of like taboo to look upon the God. And then as you get towards the middle of the song, It took a stranger to teach me to look into justice's beautiful face and to see an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's not evangelical Christianity. That's Leviticus.
Yeah.
He's going back to his
Yes.
back to his original Jewish roots, perhaps. But the I always the Old Testament God is I think had some influence on his writing the lyrics to this song.
I do. I hear what you're saying, and the clearly, I mean, without a doubt, there is, text directly from religious texts and religious imagery that are a part of this song. But I really see that, and there's a couple reasons why I take a little bit different slant at it. First of all, there's Leonard Cohen had said that he had had a conversation with Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan had asked him how long did it take him to write the song Hallelujah, and Leonard Cohen had said it took years for him to write that song, and Leonard Cohen then asked Bob Dylan, because he'd liked this song I and I, asked Bob Dylan how long it had taken Bob Dylan to write I, and Bob Dylan said 15 minutes. It was a song that was written very quickly, and I don't see an effort like that being someone who is looking at a way to let's take these different parts of religious imagery and messaging and bring it into a single song. What I see instead is I've got this conflict that I have that I want to write about. And because in the past I have spent so much time, kind of immersed in this imagery and these words and, in these writings and ultimately this poetry, it gives me these things to bring forward to make a particular point. And I see that as, what's a better way for me to see no one has ever seen the real me? What's a more dramatic, what's a more poetic or more powerful way to see nobody has ever seen the real me? Well, I think that no man sees my face and lives, meets the mark there, right? That's a way of putting that. So I just, especially with this, clearly Bob Dylan had the ability to bring forward all these different ways of putting words together. He was a master at it. He was a genius at doing this. And I just, that is just the way that I see and feel it. I see a lot of different things in this song than other people see. It's very clear. Again, you read what people's analysis are. I don't see him in bed with a strange woman at the beginning of this song. He says, "Been so long since a strange woman has slept in my bed. I can look at my wife in the morning and I can say that. I can say it's been a long time since I've slept with anyone but this." And then to look at that person and say, how sweet she sleeps, and think these wonderful things about my wife. And I feel that applies. So, it's, we all hear, different things within these songs. I just feel and especially for people that have struggled to be, nobody knows who I am. I'm constantly acting different than I truly feel that I am or whatever. I feel this song very much aligns with which should connect with those people. And I think that they do an interesting job. They take what I would call breaks or breaths in this song. There's no, big long musical breaks or solos in it, but in between, some of these verses, they kind of take a break, and it's almost like you're coming in and out of zoning in and out of maybe a dream. There's kind of a wah 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 wah, that brings you in and out of these sections, kind of like you're going to a different thought from where you were before. But in the end, it brings you back to, okay, and this is again another line, the chorus, "In creation where one's nature neither honors nor forgives." I mean, God certainly forgives, right? For someone who is Christian. I don't see how you're talking about God in that particular, that particular statement.
The Old Testament God, not the New Testament God.
Good, your Old Testament.
The
So, and you know, the idea, and I agree. Believe me, I completely agree. How it's very straightforward to align this with these, you know, with these religious tracts. Same thing with, you know, the, as you talked about, no one that sees my face lives, which is, you know, yeah, no, you can't see me. And then, you know, even the title, I, you know, I am that I am, is you know, what was supposedly spoken from God to Moses. So it's certainly there. I'm not saying that it's not there. I just hear something a little more straightforward and a little more connectable to everybody's lives in when I hear this song. A very nice song that it flows well. It's smooth. It's kind of a smooth flow to the song, and it elevates in the choruses in what I think is a very pleasant, beautiful way, and and it's just a great song to listen to.
Well, and the production was a big part of that, the Mark Knopfler production, and the album that I mentioned a little bit ago, "Oh Mercy," that came out like around 1987. Daniel Lanois, who kind of made his bones original or became known as a producer of U2, like The Unforgettable Fire and Achtung Baby and Joshua Tree. You know, Daniel Lanois was the producer of those, and if you get someone that can find a sound that Dylan likes, and they can work together, the results are good.
Yeah, yeah. So that leads us to the final song of the side, which I think is, yeah, I think that this side is bookended with two very good, very strong songs. We started with "Man of Peace," and it ends with "Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight," which is it's a love song that is just it's kind of interesting. It's not only, you know, professing one's love for someone, but it's asking something of this person at the same time. And it is in this moment, Bob Dylan, the speaker, needs their partner to be with them, to support them, to help bring them joy. It's in this particular moment, it is not the time for his partner to or his girlfriend or his wife to fall apart on him. In the now, in the moment, in this particular time, he excuse me, talks about yesterday's just a memory. Tomorrow is never what it's supposed to be. So he's very focused on the now. He's not concerned about yesterday, not concerned about tomorrow. It's like, I need you right now. Is when we need. Now is not a time to have a fight. Now is not a time for you to leave, which is kind of a part of the beginning of the song where it appears that she's going to be leaving. It's like, I really need you right now, because this is, right now is where you're needed.
Well, I agree with the way you've characterized it. It's a beautiful song. I think it is one of the great songs on this album, and it really is. I mean, the word that you used was need. One of the words you used was need, and it really is. It is just a plaintive declaration of need. I need you, and the way that the lyrics mesh with the music, it's not downbeat. It's not. It's the way that the song is put together, both lyrically and musically, it makes it not pathetic. It makes it not pitiful. It makes it is a noble, honorable declaration of need to the woman he loves or wants, and it's a great song.
And it kind of it starts out. There's a harmonica lead in to the song. It fairly quickly gets into its choruses and verses. There's kind of a switch about 2/3 of the way, maybe 3/4 of the way through the song, and kind of the whole tone and rhythm switches, and he begins to talk kind of almost like to try to convince his love that, stay away from other people, or be happy you're with me, because I am happy with you. I still remember times from before. Do you remember this time on St. James Street? You blew this, you blew Jackie P's mind. You were so fine. Clark Gable would have fell at your feet and laid his life on the line. Just kind of almost kind of like, hey, let's remember we've got something really good here. Certainly something that is a part of my life. And then it moves into kind of a harmonica break, and then back into the normal rhythm of the song, where he's talking more about the now, right? And how much how much he needs her.
Yeah, and he's also it's there's introspection into his own. He's not letting himself off the hook. It's not a song where he's blaming. If you leave me, it'll destroy me, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. The sort of things that some men are reduced to hold on to a relationship with a woman. He's kind of looking at himself as well, and a line that always sticks in my mind is where, I wish I'd been a doctor.
Yep.
Maybe I'd have saved some life that'd been lost. Maybe I'd have done some good in the world instead of burning every bridge I cross.
Yeah.
That's a fairly simple, very simple words that where he's not letting himself off the hook in terms of his own responsibility for where he's at.
Exactly. And I mean, he wished he could have been a better man. And at the same token, that he's trying, because you hear just not long after that in the song, he's talking about that he feels stuck, like he's stuck inside of a painting that's hanging in the Louvre. It's like he realizes that he wanted to be a better man, but there's times that he's stuck, and then goes right back into, and this is why I need you, right? And back into the chorus of the song about, don't fall apart on me tonight, just don't think that I could handle it. So kind of some complex analysis of his current situation, but at the end it always comes back to the same thing: I need you. And just a very straightforward, on his knees, yeah, you're the one that I need, and I need you right now.
No. Great song.
Great,
Great song, great side.
Great song, great side. That closes up the side. And if you haven't heard it, we'll have the playlist to listen to those songs in the notes, and would encourage you to do that. But until that's Bob Dylan, Infidels, side 2.
Good one. Great one.